Matt, not only are you missing the entire point of the whole story, you're doing it on purpose. You know what the story is. You've proven that you know.
We're told that Ganon has basically won. He's got his hands on the Triforce and took over the Sacred Realm. Link got sealed away for 7 years so he could grow old enough to take him on. From here on out, most of the game is played as adult Link in the future, and it's a great idea for the plot. In most action-adventure style games that revolve around saving the world, you're given some idyllic place that needs protection, or a post-apocalyptic world where the struggle of the people compels you to try and help them. Either of these scenarios can only be so effective because we're left wondering about what exactly it is we're trying to prevent, or what exactly it is we're trying to restore. As soon as you walk into Hyrule Town 7 years on, Ocarina of Time has answered both of these questions. You have an immediate comparison in your mind of what Hyrule should look like and what it does look like now.
You have very good reading comprehension. Just because from Tetra's point of view all of this is mysterious, that doesn't mean the player doesn't know who Zelda is. Tetra wasn't alive 100 years ago. She obviously doesn't know who Zelda is. That doesn't mean that this moment is out of character. We, the audience, do know who Zelda is. Her name's on the title screen. The only reason you wouldn't apply this logic to the Wind Waker is if you were being deliberately disingenuous to serve your opinion.
You have an immediate comparison in your mind of what Hyrule should look like and what it does look like now. The game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. What Hyrule should look like. The game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. What Hyrule should look like and what it does look like now. Well, not as we know it anyway. And what it does look like now.
But as previously established, the moral at the end of The Wind Waker is that you should accept the past for what it is and build a better future. Twilight Princess, being an alternate ending to the story, is now inverting that moral. Now, Link is the one protecting his heritage and saving his family, and Ganondorf is the one creating a future for himself in spite of his past. The shoe's on the other foot, but interestingly, Ganondorf is still in the wrong. This is the thematic purpose behind the timeline. At this point, I really have no patience for the people who pretend like the timeline is inconsequential or confusing, because its purpose here is obvious. Twilight Princess is a poetic inversion of Wind Waker. That's the whole reason that they're both sequels to Ocarina of Time. Now you're able to explore, on an emotional level, both sides of the same coin. It's fun and interesting, and it's very sad that a lot of people just can't be bothered. But anyway, how does Eiji Aonuma pull all this off? Well, Zant is the key here. Notice that Zant doesn't have to beg Ganondorf for powers or anything. Ganondorf actually comes up to Zant. Let's think about this for 2 seconds. Why Zant? Well, Zant must be special, right? Remember how Tetra is the next Zelda after her mother? Well, here, Zant is the heir to the Lost Gerudo Patriarchy. He's the third male Gerudo after Groose. Once again, this stuff would be totally obvious if Matt simply read the text on screen. You know, thank God it's actually on screen this time. If this was really a retrospective, like it says in the title, wouldn't it contain information that Matthew would only have access to in retrospect? You know, like an art book that explains the story in black and white detail. But no, just to make sure he's been contrarian to every single point made by Hyrule Historia, since that's the true reason he made these videos, he's going to insist that Zant was always supposed to be the main villain of Twilight Princess. With no evidence, mind you. I mean, seriously? I'm not trying to be mean, but you don't have to make fun of these videos. They just make fun of themselves.
It may be a case they only made this decision because they knew many players would be replaying the game and thus would be ready for hard mode, but I hope they seriously consider this for the next Zelda. At the end of the game, you're taking on multiple Darknuts at once, who do several hearts of damage if they manage to connect.
There's a concerted effort by Matt to overgeneralize and downplay everything, not just the story. He's constantly acting like he's too good for the game. And if that's how you feel about video games, that they should have to earn your attention and respect, you know, that's a matter of personal taste. You can like whatever you want, but don't delude yourself into thinking that attitude makes you superior to everyone else. Now, like I said, most fans these days already know most of this. Matthew is a huge outlier. But at the end of the day, even the fans who are aware just aren't seeing the bigger picture, so we need to keep zooming out. And there's a huge prerequisite before you can truly appreciate Twilight Princess as the first proper revision to Zelda's chronology.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun playthrough. Anyone here never see this? Also, thank you for the host, Mike. Hi, everybody. Oh, so there's a lot of people who have never played this game. I think you'll enjoy this. This is going to be one of those playthroughs I think you might remember for a little while. Not because of me, but because of the game. It's just one of those games. Really nice look at the world. For anyone who's getting Legend of Zelda vibes, it's a pretty damn different game, aside from just a couple of visual similarities and sword. And horse, and bridge, and castle. And bow, and climbing. Oh, and Zelda is in this. And Link. And Epona. And Ganon. Alright, I'll stop.
Fumito Ueda is intentionally pulling from Eiji Aonuma in multiple important points in both Ico and in Shadow of the Colossus. And Eiji Aonuma is intentionally pulling from Fumito Ueda in multiple important parts in Twilight Princess, in Skyward Sword, and even as early as The Wind Waker. So, no, Vinny, their similarities are not superficial. Ico was essentially a love letter to Ocarina of Time, and Shadow of the Colossus has a load of distinctly intentional references to Majora's Mask. Aonuma is referencing Ueda as a reciprocation of Ueda's own references to him. This is about two artists coming to an emotional agreement about something. The comparison currently on screen alone proves that they were not only good friends and have a strong relationship, but that they were actively bouncing ideas off of one another and making notes in each other's margins. Comparing side by side like this isn't revealing something shallow like their favorite flavor of ice cream, it's corroborating evidence of their authority in their own work. The big one that I always think of is this one, the spiral staircase inside the tower. Aonuma wants you to think about Yorda from Ico, and he wants you to compare Yorda in that game to Zelda's role in this game. A pale, fragile girl hiding in the shadows. And that's exactly why Ganondorf's first phase is fighting Zelda as a puppet. Unfortunately, Shadow of the Colossus exists in public consciousness right now, exclusively for early 2000s nostalgia farming, and nobody, including Vinny, bothers to recognize that its whole existence is as a sequel to Ico. You're lucky if they mention Last Guardian, if only to parrot some IGN-esque complaints at it. And to say that Ueda has been disrespected by Western audiences would be a huge, huge understatement. And it's not alone. Actually, a lot of amateur artists who became interested in the medium at the time went for the PS2, because finally their work wouldn't have to be treated like toys. Like Lorne Lanning, for example. He started on the PS2.
What was also on the horizon was Sony PlayStation. So Sony was saying, we're going to get into the game business. And that was kind of out there a couple years before the PlayStation launch, at least. And that's when I thought, this is really going to get interesting, because for the first time, we're going to have a real, true entertainment company get into the game business as a player, and not just a toy company. And that's how I saw Sega and Nintendo, was toy companies. And I don't mean that in any derogatory or condescending way. I just meant they saw their market, and they didn't believe in things like sequels. check this out, right? So we're going around and talking to game publishers and stuff, and I'm trying to tell them how we're going to build a series, and because I'm just following, like, what does X-Files do? What did Disney do? What did the sequels? This is all Hollywood's about. In games, they were thinking, and this is in 1993, 94, 95, they're going, there's no money in sequels. The sequel only sells at best half as much as the original hit, so we don't really bank on it. And I saw that, I was like, there's one of our moments. There's one of my George Lucas, Walt Disney moments. They don't believe in sequels, which means they don't believe in brand, which means they still thinking about it like it's the toy industry. You know, you come out with Cabbage Patch Kid, but you can't milk it to death, right? Barbie lasts forever, Hot Wheels last forever, Legos lasted forever, but everything else tends to be largely come and go. So the toy industry thought more in this way of, you come up with a toy, if it can be a hit, you ride it, you milk that cow for all it's worth, and then you got to come up with a new one. And games was still thinking that way.
Eiji Aonuma's relevance to all this is that he got stupid lucky and blazed a trail, which is why Fumito Ueda respected him so deeply.
Now, Nintendo, maybe not, because they already had the legacy of Mario and Donkey Kong and things like that, and they were Zelda. And so I don't know, because I wasn't interfacing with Nintendo, but I was talking to others.
These other artists who got their start on PS2 games, like Lorne Lanning, Fumito Ueda, and even Hideo Kojima, were all following in Aonuma's footsteps. Like I said earlier, this is the entire reason that people like this became developers and became artists. It was always what was most important to them and what they wanted to do with their lives. There's a lot of vocal gamers today that think that any and all cutscenes and dialogue and story is optional or inconsequential in some way. They think that whatever happens in a cutscene can't or should never have an effect on gameplay. And they act shocked and offended when the character's story puts them at a gameplay disadvantage. Now, this is crucially a fundamental misunderstanding of the purpose of art. Although, I guess I should say that the situation is nuanced, because there is an ongoing discussion about whether or not video games are art. As I've been showing, and as I'll continue to show, games are certainly capable of being narrative art, so what's the mix-up?
Many champion Ico as a prime example of a game which is also a work of art, with some even saying it marks the moment where games started to embrace artistic qualities on par with other mediums. The truth, however, is that Ico is no more or less a work of art than Another World was 10 years before it. It's arguable which one is better, of course, but that's besides the point. They share so many similarities that calling one a work of art while dismissing the other would be ridiculous. Ueda didn't set out specifically to create a work of art because computer games are already inherently a form of art. Many game designers cite Ico as one of their favourite games, and if a lot of people gravitate towards something, inevitably some of them will misunderstand it, at least on some level. Sometimes it seems like the impression Ico has left on game designers is that subverting expectations or eschewing common design sensibilities automatically brings a game closer to being a piece of art. Ueda, however, understood when to use conventional elements, such as a final boss fight, to his advantage.
I'm going to talk at length about why, in their inception, video games were not art, and in a lot of cases, many games today are not art and aren't trying to be art. Even though, like I said, I tried to structure this video so that I don't waste any time, there is obviously gray area and nuance to it, and it won't be something that can be finished here. If I'm lucky, this video will be the beginning of that conversation. But anyway, story-driven gameplay is definitively what these artists always wanted to do. The consistent problem in all these cases is that life isn't simple. We're going to get into later one of the main causes of life's problems, but you should immediately understand that Abe's Odyssey, Ico, and the first Metal Gear are all extremely unfinished games, and their sequels don't fare any better. These games don't accurately reflect the artists that truly made them. As a direct result, the audience that gained an attachment and became fans of their earlier work when they couldn't do what they wanted almost always develop mistaken impressions. These games were never gameplay first or open world or whatever buzzword everybody just latched onto last year. These fans preferred when the story had less prominence, not because their perceived insights were correct, but because they're so insecure that they can't confront their emotions, even in fiction. They inherently hate anything that challenges their comprehension, and especially challenges their patience, and they prove how insecure they are with how they behave.
This one is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, but wait, not a sequel to the end where adult Link defeats Ganon, no, it's a sequel to young Link after he got sent back. So now, any speculation of Nintendo ever making a sequel to Zelda 2 is deader than shit. They can't even make a sequel that follows in consecutive order. Instead, they just keep going back, and then maybe taking a small step up again, and then back again. We have a sequel to the original, a prequel to the original, a sequel to the prequel, a prequel to the prequel, and a sequel to the young Link of the prequel's prequel. What the fuck?
Actually, this clip of James Rolfe is a perfect example about what I'm talking about here, because he wants a direct sequel to Zelda 2. He wants the story to continue in one direction. First of all, let me just say that that was never going to happen, because before Ocarina of Time, the story of Zelda that was being told was nowhere near deep enough to actually support that, which is directly why Tezuka and Koizumi immediately ran away from that as soon as they possibly could.
They don't understand yet. It's going to be brand IP and sequels. But that means it's got to be deeper, richer universes. And in the shit you're currently delivering, I understand why you don't believe in sequels. Because that story sucked. No one gives a fuck about your story because it sucks. If it wasn't good play, your character sucks because you don't have any character development. And so I was very critical of what the characters were in games. Not that I wasn't enjoying them, but when you put it up to a Hollywood standard of character development, character arc, what's happening across the multi-act structure, you had a whole different analysis of what constituted a popular character. So does Mario turn into a good movie? It's a fucking terrible movie, right? It's a terrible movie because it's not there to begin with, right? Does Ratchet and Clank make a good movie? I love Insomniac. Why would you make a movie out of Ratchet and Clank? How deep is the fabric of those characters? How many other game movies did we just give no depth that we expect from movies? So they brought to the movie the same superficiality that's in the game, except what they had the game going for it was good challenge. Now it's just a challenge to watch, right? So for me, I was like, if we build really rich characters with really rich, deep stories that aren't what you expect, so they have the ability to possibly cut through, then they might have a longer life. And as the game industry matures, then maybe they can hit the big time. Then maybe they can, really have their name in lights.
What James really wants when he says that he wants a sequel to Zelda 2 is for the story to be an unimportant background thing like before. He wants a sequel that doesn't challenge him and doesn't make him think about all the scary time travel continuity stuff, which, as I've been showing, isn't nearly as complicated as this kind of fan would have you believe. And anyway, if something was important enough to you that you felt the need to complain about it on the internet, doesn't that prove that it matters? It clearly got a reaction out of you. You see a similar thing with how Sonic fans reacted to the whole Two Worlds thing, but that's its own video essay. The reality is, their reactions don't hinge on whether or not these things were always there, or if they were consequentially important. What these types of audiences aren't willing to admit is that they're automatically hostile to the mere concept of there being an overarching story in the first place. The really weird part about all of this for me is that, despite being inspired by AVGN, Vinny really isn't like that, historically speaking. Vinny actually slows down and reads the NPC dialogue like signposts. Vinny plays these games correctly, and the results speak for themselves.
It goes like this. All right, there's 3 separate timelines that branch off of Ocarina of Time. So here's how it goes. I want to explain it because it's very interesting. I just learned some more little details in Hyrule Historia. So 3 different timelines. In one of the timelines, when Ocarina ends, Link goes back to being a child. That's the ending that we see. And as a child, Link goes to Princess Zelda, which the game then freezes. Like you'll see, it says it's speculated in one section, then in another section it says it's confirmed. So, yeah. But listen, so Link and Zelda, they meet again at the very end of Ocarina of Time in the castle courtyard, and Link now has the mark of the Triforce on his hand. So he tells Zelda what's about to happen, and Zelda says, well look, you need to go far away. You need to go someplace else, because Ganondorf is going to be looking for you, and he wants to access the Sacred Realm. So, Zelda tells the king, they find out that, Ganondorf was a cunt, and they decide to get rid of him. Many years down the road, they execute him. That's in Twilight Princess. But here's what happened to Link. Link wandered off into the forest without a fairy. He was looking for Navi. It was the Lost Woods. And what really happened in Majora's Mask doesn't say for a fact, doesn't say that Link was in fact, in this dream world of his regret and his, problems. I mean, it doesn't say that, but it's implied. And, Navi didn't get lost. Navi flies away. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Navi just flies away. And in the beginning of Majora, you see that Link is looking for a friend, and he's obviously in the woods, and it's highly speculated that, say if Majora did happen, let's just say it did, if it was real, if there really was a parallel universe that Link went to and returned from, well, that Link was forever forgotten. No one knew about the Hero of Time. No one celebrated the Hero of Time in this particular timeline. And his regret over that, as it states in Hyrule Historia, allowed him to be the swordsman whose sole purpose was to teach the new Link of Twilight Princess the moves that he knew as a way to pass down his legacy. Just to further add to that, in Hyrule Historia, it's directly stated that the Hero of Time, was never to be seen or heard from again after Majora's Mask. So, isn't this stuff really interesting? Like, I love this stuff, the theories. And it seems like Majora was the deepest and had the most psychological stuff going on there. So, and there you go. Tingle is a representation of Link. Tingle is a mutation of Link, because he's a 40-year-old man dressed as a fairy, which again is representative of the child-adult theme. So, I don't know if any of this is true, but I love it. I love talking about it. It's very interesting. So the hero is successful, and the adult era, Ganondorf is revived, Hyrule is sealed and flooded. Because the hero wasn't even around, I don't think. I have to read into that a little bit more. I haven't gotten to the Wind Waker section yet. And then there's the one, like I said, with Majora, where he's a kid and goes back to being a kid. I know it's a little bit to wrap your head around, but it is exceedingly interesting.
As we're going to see later, Vinny's certainly not perfect, but I just want to interject and say that everything I say here is with peace and love. Vinny, you were the reason I got interested in this stuff in the first place. I know what you're capable of, and I don't think you're stupid, but yes, I'm going to be critical of a popular streamer. Oh no! As Vinny just pointed out, if the adult dungeons never happened, Hyrule experiences an alternate history that we didn't get to see as it was happening, technically, but is what the plot of Twilight Princess is, the Aftermath 2. Again, none of that is a fan theory, and it's not inconsequential.
It says it's speculated in one section, then in another section it says it's confirmed. So, yeah.
It's the way that the director of both Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess intended the audience to interpret their connected story, also known as canon, official. It's not a mystery, it's not hidden, it's explicitly told to you in dialogue, and it's required for properly understanding the story. It bears repeating for all the people who watched Matthew Matewitz and left it at that. Again, a lot of people just automatically assume that this is all bullshit, and their real agenda is to push this idea that video games are toys and not narrative art. But remember that with the timeline in mind, before Twilight Princess, Majora's Mask takes place. And then the main thing that got cut from the development of Majora's Mask were extensive animations for child Zelda.
I'm glad that Zelda, Ganon and Hyrule are all absent from Majora's Mask, because after Ocarina of Time, there was no need to revisit Hyrule and no story to be told there. Any direct sequel would need to be told somewhere else in order not to weaken the impact of the events in Ocarina.
It's true that the Twilight Realm specifically didn't exist in the 64 Zeldas. As I get into in Section 3, Aonuma's ready to stop making Zelda games altogether after Wind Waker. But it's provincial to assume that just because the Twilight didn't exist before this, that it automatically makes it unfaithful to his original intent when he was working on Ocarina, or to others that Aonuma was collaborating with at the time, like Koizumi and Takezawa. If you're paying attention to the story, not only do these things fit with the themes and morals from before, but it also makes sense on a literal level. If the adult dungeons never happened, like Forest Temple for example, the Deku Sprout is never planted. They pretty much beat you over the head with the differences between the Kokiri and Hylians, which culminates in this reveal.
When Link learns new combat techniques, he's trained by a Stalfos figure which could easily be taken to be Link from Ocarina of Time. Since it's said in that game, any Hylian which enters the Lost Woods is doomed to turn into a Stalfos. If any of the various incarnations of Link have gotten a hard time, it's Ocarina of Time Link. He lives to see Hyrule Town destroyed by Ganon, and then ends up in the nightmarish land of Termina under perpetual threat of annihilation. In the end, he winds up as a Stalfos. The goddesses didn't exactly treat him well. As good as these sequences are, they're part of my biggest problem with Twilight Princess. It feels like it was made to be Ocarina of Time 2.
It's so overexplained, even Matthew gets it. There really is only one correct interpretation, which is something I want to get out of the way right now. Nintendo fans especially are completely obsessed with this false idea of freedom and player autonomy. The truth is that no matter what game you're playing, whether it's Minecraft or BioShock, everything you're doing is within the confines of the intentions of the developers. There's no such thing as a linear game, because if you do something unintended, then that's a glitch, not a design element. The player might have control over certain small actions, but at no point in any game are you in control of what context those actions can be applied, which is why level design is the single most important aspect of game design, and what ultimately controls the language of the medium. The really groundbreaking thing about Shadow of the Colossus is that it blurs the line between enemy design and level design. The larger-than-life enemies are the levels, you climb on them, and Ueda's philosophy really is about this context of communication with NPCs, which unfortunately we won't get into a lot in this video. As a result of that, though, Ueda's games are uniquely designed in such a way that you can absorb all the story without any dialogue, or when there is dialogue, it's usually the fictional language system that he uses, which Aonuma also took a nod from in The Wind Waker. There is a pretty good video by Max Darrett where he talks about all the Gerudo's dark magic stuff, and how in both Zelda and in Ico, there's a focus of this dark transformation magic and body horror. But again, most of that is the bleeding edge of the fandom, and even he doesn't get into everything. These 5 Zelda games really aren't that dense with story, and like I keep saying, they explicitly tell you this stuff in dialogue. The way that Fumito Ueda approached the problem is that he set it up so that the dialogue would not be necessary. Aonuma's games still mostly required dialogue because of his background, but you can see, even down to the plot details, all of this is important, like how Ganon is taking girls to the Forsaken Fortress because they have yellow hair. Exactly how Ico is taken to the Queen's Castle because he's a boy with horns. These kinds of traditions of sacrifice to ward off evil are pretty essential to Shintoism, and I really shouldn't have to tell you that Shintoism is important to something created in Japan. So as you can see, Zelda's connections to Ico and Ico's connections to Zelda are not optional pieces of this analysis. Even in Vinny's case, I actually don't think he meant to say that Ico and Zelda aren't connected, and what he really meant was just for chat to not watch the gameplay expecting Zelda, which is a good primer.
For anyone who's getting Legend of Zelda vibes, it's a pretty damn different game, aside from just a couple of visual similarities and sword. And horse, and bridge, and castle.
But when he recognizes the Bridge of Elden quote, as he's watching it, you can tell he instantly regretted the way he worded it. Although, why Vinny didn't notice the Lost Woods quotes from earlier, I have absolutely no clue. And he also didn't apologize after realizing he was wrong, he just turned it into a joke.
Oh, and Zelda is in this. And Link, and Epona. And Ganon. Alright, I'll stop.
This was an opportunity for him to share some actual media literacy with a crowd of 1,000 people watching live, and he passed it up. If you're a longtime Zelda fan, and you didn't know that it takes cues from the Ico games, I'm not going to say that that's okay, because I don't think it's okay. These ideas don't come from nowhere, and they're not meant to seem as if they do. The only reason Nintendo fans don't know any of this is because all their gaming experience exists in a bubble.
I feel like right now in the early days of Switch, that's what you're seeing, is that there's people who have the Switch and are hungry for
but
games
how many?
to play.
Well, how big is it?
The
How big is the audience?
Exactly.
What is it? 2 million units?
2 million.
yeah,
is
right,
what
'cause that's what they wanted
the
to hit
original
by.
launch
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
been.
So let's take 2 million units,
Yeah.
right? Now, do you ever sell in 10% of the installed base?
Supposedly, Switch has a crazy attach rate with the
Well,
with
that's because
Zelda
there's
and then-
so few available. One of the highest IPs of all time, right? Nintendo first party will deliver IPs that the Nintendo audience is just frothing for, right? So they'll have the highest attach rate of any new console with their own specific IPs, Zelda and Mario.
And get them to go get it in the same way like Limbo did. Where Limbo, hey, I'm only on Xbox, this is great. And by the time I got to PlayStation 4, everybody snapped it up.
And I think it's a great comparison, and it's true. And how many cases will that happen for? No, really. Who really, by the end of the life of the Wii, who else was making money on the Wii aside from Nintendo? How many titles sold for the Wii that weren't Nintendo first party?
Sure.
Okay. So what happened? So they started basically evaporating third-party support, right? Then we get to Wii U. What happened? Same.
No third parties, yeah.
How well are other developers, first party, third party, indie, how well are they going to bring titles over? Not very well, because they're going to have to spend more time, energy, and effort to get it onto that console for an underpowered console that's going to have fewer units in the marketplace. And so they'll have an unusually high attach rate.
Right.
But what's the chance of anyone else after the initial launch, right? Because the first
Well, now
thing,
as the store fills up,
if there's only 3 titles available,
Yeah.
you're probably going to sell super high attachment rate, right? But as soon as 10 are available, how are you going to do?
Yeah,
As
yeah.
soon as 20 are available, how are you going to do? Which is really the metric, right? If you didn't
Yeah.
make it day one, you're in the higher numbers of competitive stuff. So there could be some advantages for some people, but overall, it's going to add up to the same thing: smaller portfolio on the library. Period. At the
And
end of the day, the catalog is going to be this when it could have been this.
But
You would
why?
have thought that maybe if there's no games for sale on a network, if people have a hardware device, maybe they'd like to know that a game has become available.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that, in a silly me.
Yeah.
If you grew up with Nintendo, there's a good chance you never leave Nintendo, and more crucially, you never actually grow up. Instead of complaining that Skyward Sword was boring, what people should have said at the time of its release is how bold it actually was. And no, I'm not saying that out of any kind of bias or prejudice. This is one of the key things that holds video games back from being appreciated as narrative art. All of the art intellectuals think that video games are merely toys, and all the gamers are only interested in the toy-like qualities of the games they play. I'm not even the first person to complain about this reactionary approach to story-driven games on Vinesauce, and it's not an irrelevant issue either. It's been happening recently. According to Vinny, he says that it's his fault, and he wishes he gave Death Stranding 1 a better chance. But you notice his actions tell a different story. Now, have I ever played a video game purely for fun? Of course I have. Have I ever stopped playing a game purely because I wasn't having fun? Yeah, it happens. But those are emotional reactions, and they're selfish reactions. A large constituency of gamers, including Vinny, don't seem to realize how dangerous this is. By far the biggest emotional insecurity with this is the never-ending fake debate about linear versus open-world games. If you ask people who do why they like open-world games, chances are they'll say something about freedom. Okay. Freedom to do what exactly? A video game is a curated experience. At no point during any game is the player ever in control of their experience. Freedom is not part of any field of design. Now, some say that moving is the closest thing to being free, but freedom itself is not an idea. It's an emotion born out of a desire to identify with emptiness and aimlessness. Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing is worth nothing, but hey, at least it's free. I mean, why would anyone think that removing level design makes a video game unique in any way? It just turns it into a pointless tech demo with no challenge, no meaning, just walking from point A to point B for hours. If you're someone who truly enjoys open world level design, I have to stress that you are not being entertained by an artist's imagination. You're just caught up in your own. This desire to escape and to be entertained is inherently childish no matter what form it comes in. And you shouldn't be proud that you use cigarettes or video games or porn or anything. I'm not saying that you can't do those things, okay? Life's not easy. I get it. But I'm saying that when you do, you probably shouldn't brag about it. I'm just going to say right now that I don't know what Vinny thinks or what he believes, but his actions as of current don't exactly illustrate significant progression of his emotional maturity. Vinny, you've built an entire career off playing video games on the internet. And again, you're not stupid. I know you're not. If this is something that's important to you, you need to sit up straight and act like it. Stop covering your ass, stop being ironic and self-deprecating, and just own it, man. Having humility and being mature really shouldn't be high bars to clear, but I guess that's where we are today.